Homer is a name associated with the most significant epics of Greek literature, the Iliad and the Odyssey, published around 700 BCE. Written in ancient Homeric Greek, these poems recount the central events of the Trojan War and the heroes who flourished and died in it. The poet or compiler named Homer is an interesting figure historically, as the person presented as a blind, wandering bard might well be just a myth. There is, in fact, no detailed information that has survived or possibly ever existed about Homer. Stories about Homer reveal that the preservation and dissemination of his poems were ensured by Homer's own descendants, the Homeridae, from whom the Homeric school later emerged. When it comes to Homer, the only certain thing we have gathered from the grains of knowledge and accepted by the Academy is that the ancient Greeks associated his name with the poems that, with their significance, shaped the education and culture of Southern Europe, forming the backbone of the cultural evolution of antiquity. If Homer is interpreted as a real person, it's reasonable to assume he lived in Greece. As evidence to support this, one could point to the Homeric tradition formed on the island of Chios. Besides the debate on the existence of the wandering bard himself, even more significant contradictions arise when critically examining the so-called Homeric geography in his poems. Homer tends to describe the geographical features of locations in his poems with surprising accuracy, but the islands, cities, and lands are at best only partial matches to the geography of the Mediterranean, and sometimes the connections are completely non-existent. This problem is not new. 2,000 years ago, the Greek geographer and historian Strabo wondered why the island of Pharos, mentioned in the Odyssey, was said to be a day's sail from Egypt when, in reality, this small island is located right next to the harbor of Alexandria in Egypt. To mention a few other contradictions, one of the Odyssey's key islands, Ithaca, is described in the poem as the westernmost of a group of 3 main islands located towards the sunset. However, the modern Greek Ithaca in the Ionian Sea does not match these geographical descriptions from the poem. The main island of this group in the poems, Dulichium, which means long in Greek, has never been found in the Mediterranean. One of the most puzzling contradictions is found in the descriptions of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. In both poems, Peloponnesus is presented as a plain, while in reality, the peninsula is dominated by mountains up to 2.5 kilometers high. The question then arises, why are the contradictions so large? For a long time, it has been suggested that changes that occurred after the poems were written, namely the passage of time, could have altered place names so that they are no longer comparable. This could very well be possible, but the tablets from the Mycenaean culture, found in the region of Greece and the Aegean Sea, which are contemporary with the Homeric poems, are just as much in contradiction with Homeric geography as the present day. These observed contradictions have led to extensive research and interesting and varied theories, especially intriguing for us living in Northern Europe, among which today we delve into the research by the Italian Felice Vinci. Felice Vinci, an Italian nuclear engineer and independent historian, has developed a unique theory placing the events of the Iliad and Odyssey in Northern Europe, specifically in the Baltic and Scandinavia, around the North Sea, Gulf of Finland, Gulf of Bothnia, and the Baltic Sea. Vinci has written a book titled The Baltic Origins of Homer's Epic Tales and has served as a visiting lecturer at universities in Vancouver, Riga, Rome, and Padua. Among academic historians, Vinci's theory is regarded as pseudoscience, and the similarities he presents between place names in Finland and those mentioned in Homer's poems are considered coincidental. The Department of Finno-Ugric Studies at the University of Helsinki has not taken Vinci's onomastic studies seriously, but it would be interesting to know whether other aspects of the theory have even been considered. One of Vinci's key pieces of evidence relies on the Greek philosopher Plutarch's mention of the island of Ogygia. Ogygia, where Calypso, the daughter of Atlas in Greek mythology, lived, is strongly linked to the Homeric poems, as Calypso held Odysseus captive on the island for 7 years before allowing him to return to his wife Penelope in Ithaca. Plutarch's definition of Ogyggia's location is astonishing, as he states it was located in the North Atlantic, 5 days' sail from Britain towards the sunset. With this information, Vinci identified Ogygia as being in the Faroe Islands, from where Odysseus began his return journey eastward towards Seuraa, which Vinci identifies with the west coast of Norway, and then to the Baltic Sea. Vinci proposes that the Iliad and Odyssey originated as stories from the Bronze Age in Scandinavia around 2000 BCE, preserved through oral tradition. They made their way to the Mediterranean, with tribes moving south from the north as the climate became cooler at the end of the Holocene climatic optimum. These tribes, according to Vinci, could have been the founders of the Mycenaean culture in the Aegean Sea and recreated their northern world in the south, transferring geographical names and stories of conflicts through oral tradition. Is there any evidence for this? In 2007, in the study Ancient Migrations, archaeologist and philologist L.S. Klein suggested that both ancient and modern Greek languages contain a substratum, a layer of vocabulary strongly related to geography and culture. L.S. Klein proposed this vocabulary originated from a non-Greek language. Could it be possible that Finno-Ugric languages form the basis of this vocabulary? If we consider geographical terms, is it a coincidence that Olympus, the name of Greece's highest mountain, resembles the Finnish word ylempi, meaning upper, which can be seen as a clear geographical description? Or that the Hellenic kingdom of Macedonia, very mountainous in its geography, resembles the Estonian word Mäkinen, or the Finnish word Mäkinen, both describing mountainous geography? Hence, is it also a coincidence that there are still places in Finland that correspond to locations mentioned in the Homeric poems? Evaluating the origin of Finnish place names is challenging, since records only go back about 1,000 years, so we really do not know how deep the roots of these names go. However, if we examine the ancient shorelines of the Litorina Sea to the west of Helsinki, we encounter intriguing nominal coincidences. Place names match allies of ancient Troy, such as
Askainen,
corresponding to ancient Ascanius,
Reso,
to Rhesus,
Karjaa,
to Caria,
Nästi,
to Nastes, a leader of the Carians,
Lyökki,
to Lycia,
Tenala,
to Tenedos,
Kiila,
to Chilla,
Kiikoinen,
to the Ciconians. We also find King Tantalus, who ruled an area next to Troy and was buried on Mount Sipylus in the names
Tantala
and
Sipilä.
And then there's Troia, resembling Troy. The climate in the poems is usually described as cold and variable, unlike the Mediterranean climate. The Iliad features massive storms, rains, floods, and mentions of snow on low-lying lands. Fog is a common concept in Troy, Seuraa, Ithaca, and the land of the Cyclopes, which, according to a 1,000-year-old map by Adam of Bremen, was located in northern Norway. It's also remarkable that, for example, the Iliad has only a few mentions of the sun and its heat, and the Odyssey none at all when discussing the main islands of the poem. The colder climate described in the poems leads to characters wearing clothing more typical of the north than the Mediterranean. Thick cloaks and tunics mentioned in several passages are identical to those found in Danish Bronze Age graves. It's also somewhat odd that the diet does not include fruits, vegetables, olive oil, olives, or figs, but instead consists of beef, pork, and game, resembling more a Viking-like diet than a Mediterranean one. Homer's Achaeans resemble a northern people in their ways of life and social structures. They use oxen to determine the value of trade goods, a practice also found in Viking societies. The ships described are very similar to Viking ships, with either a lowered or even detachable mast and a very shallow keel. The battles described do not follow Mediterranean traditions, as they often involve fighting man-to-man in front of horse-drawn chariots, a tradition reminiscent of Celtic battle methods. Celtic traditions, in turn, are likely to have come from Doggerland, a large island between Britain and Denmark that was destroyed and submerged by a tsunami caused by the Storegga slide about 8,000 years ago, forcing the population to move both west and east to Scandinavia. Among other curious observations from the Iliad and Odyssey, the Homeric language predates Homer, as the differentiation between adverbial and prepositional elements was common about 500 years before the supposed creation of the poems. The poems lack Dionysus, a deity of great importance to Mycenaean and classical Greece, suggesting the poems are much older than Dionysus. The birth of Helen of Troy from an egg resembles Finno-Ugric traditions, such as the Estonian epic Kalevipoeg, where the beautiful Linda is born in the same manner. In Norse mythology, Valkyries collected the souls of brave warriors from battlefields, a role similar to the Homeric Kyras. The words Valkyria and Keri resemble each other. The great battle in the Iliad, lasting 2 days and 1 night, seems implausible in the Mediterranean, where darkness falls early and nights are pitch black. The term amphilyke, meaning clear night, used in the descriptions, only appears in literature when discussing Hyperborean Apollo. Hyperborea is a land in Greek mythology located in the north, where people lived in harmony with nature. The battle could have been possible around the summer solstice in the Nordic region. Scandinavia, and especially Finland, share some striking similarities with ancient Greece. A coin over 2,000 years old found on the island of Corfu depicts a familiar labyrinth, Jäävuori-luennot, similar to stone labyrinths found on Finland's west coast today. The origin of this Minoan labyrinth tradition is unknown, but while the Minotaur myth centers on a bull, Jäävuori-luennot are associated with a woman at their center, suggesting a possibly older Nordic origin. When Hesiod speaks of a golden race that inhabited Greece before the Achaeans and Ionians, could he be referring to people from the north? Or when Herodotus writes that the holiest temple of the Hellenes on the island of Delos was founded by northern tribes, could this be true? This could be easily verified, as the graves of the founding tribe members are still on Delos, where no one else has been allowed to be buried. Could the Hyperboreans have brought not only offerings, but also knowledge and building skills to Greece? Is this why Dendra features menhir traditions familiar to us from the north? But what about the city of Troy, discovered at Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey by Heinrich Schliemann? Felice Vinci emphasizes that the geographical location of Schliemann's findings poses difficulties for linking them to the ancient city of Troy as described by Homer. Strabo had described that the plain in front of the city Schliemann found was entirely submerged in water and later covered with silt, making it difficult to imagine epic battles taking place there. Moreover, many classical scholars strongly believe that Schliemann's discovery cannot be connected to the Homeric tales as the location of ancient Troy. Where then could this ancient mythical Troy be found? Felice Vinci meticulously charts Odysseus's journey from Ogygia to Ithaca, in this case from Nolsoy in the Faroe Islands towards Sherria or the west coast of Norway. It's noteworthy that Sherria corresponds to the Scandinavian word for a rocky coast, skur, or skurja in Old Norse, skär in Swedish today. On the way to Sherria, they encounter the sea monster Charybdis, which guards a narrow strait and is known to suck in large amounts of water 3 times a day. Is it a coincidence that one of the world's strongest tidal currents, capable of creating whirlpools up to 50 meters in diameter, exists along Norway's west coast, known as Moskstraumen? or maelstrom. The journey from Seuraa continued to Ithaca, which Vinci believes is located in the Danish archipelago, ultimately leading to Troy, approximately 100 kilometers west of Helsinki in the modern village of Toija.